Hi, everyone. I'm Yoko Ishihara, a president of IIDA Northern California Chapter. Thank you for joining us today for the first session of Dignity, Equity, and Justice by Design Conversation Series. First of all, yesterday was a historic moment as we have our first woman of color, Kamala Harris, on the major party ticket. However, the past few months have been a painful reminder for where we are as a society. We are at the critical moment, which we all must listen to each other, have the hard conversation, learn, and most importantly, take actions individually and collectively as a community to dismantle racism, injustice, and inequity. For those reasons, we decided to start this conversation series and other equity initiatives to inspire our design community, provide necessary resources, and platform for conversation and actions in order to help move our industry towards an equitable future. Now, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our annual patrons with IIDA Northern California Chapter. Platinum level 2, gold level Gensler. We would also like to thank our silver, bronze, nickel, and design level patrons. A small housekeeping, we will have a Q&A sessions for the last 30 minutes or so. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask the panelists, please post in the Q&A box on the right side of the menu section. I'd like to now introduce our moderator, Julia Witherspoon. Julia, please come on. Julia is an architectural designer on the mission to create more inclusive spaces within design. She has experience working on an array of architecture and projects of various scales from workplace, commercial interiors, aviation, community, civic design, and now higher education at Smith Group in San Francisco. Julia is committed to pushing the envelope for improvement in diversity, inclusion, and belonging within the design industry, and dedicated to increasing visibility and representation in design. She's an associate member of American Institute of Architects, San Francisco, and the secretary for the San Francisco chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects. She's engaged in a variety of advocacy communities in the Bay Area, including AIA San Francisco Equity by Design, Mentorship, and Professional Practice. Along with a featured in Architects magazine in December 2018, her passion has brought her to speak at a number of events, including San Francisco Design Week 2018 and AIGA Pasadena 2019. Please welcome Julia Witherspoon. Thank you, Julia.
Hi, can you hear me well? Perfect. So thank you, Yoko, for that beautiful introduction. I think the conversation is really important now more than ever. So I thank IIDA Northern California for having me. And I am a Northern California native as well. So I appreciate that. So I wanted to start with talking about why we're here. There's a lot of people on the line, and hopefully you are here because you want to be a part of the change, you want to be a part of the movement, and you want to be vulnerable to having these, uncomfortable conversations around race and equity and design. It's been a hard couple of months and, years and decades and centuries. And I think a lot of us are kind of in this space of where do we go from here? Perhaps you yourself have been, a part of the protests. Perhaps you have, contributed in other ways, or perhaps you're just kind of starting to learn. So we really just want to challenge everyone to really be listening and have an open heart to the things that we're going to be talking about today. And we want to make sure that we're making space for our Black designers overall in this space, in kind of this equation, as this is our lived experience. And I think for equity, justice, diversity, inclusion, engagement, belonging, it's kind of been a conversation that we all have been talking about for the last couple of years, and it's been at the forefront, and this is why we're here. But the real, catalyst for this conversation is from the injustices and the mistreatment of Black people, and the culmination of that in April with, the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and the list goes on. And really kind of like sitting back and taking a look at what that actually means, and seeing that across our devices, and also being in this national global health crisis and pandemic, being in these spaces where there's no distractions and there's nowhere to go. So we're hyper focused on these things. And so I would like to acknowledge those in the room that, identify as Black or Indigenous people of color. It's not easy to kind of live through this. And I want to acknowledge the trauma that comes with the experience. And then also shout out to people of color that have been out and protesting and risking their lives essentially for the fighting to make our existence matter, while also, doing your 9-to-5 job, while also holding everything else down in this crisis and choosing to be present. And then if you don't identify as a Black or Indigenous person of color, I just want to challenge you to listen to the panelists and think how you can be an ally and aid in this conversation, and think about how this affects the interior design industry and the ways that we can move forward. And so I want to begin with a couple of quotes. First being from Cheryl Durst, which is your Executive Vice President and CEO of IIDA, pulling a quote from one of her most recent articles. She quotes, "We are at a pivotal moment where we must face great societal changes that will not be repaired without great collective effort. Confronting racism, injustice, and the need for equity is critical to moving forward. And current events expose how much work needs to be done for all of us to really be in this together." So I really want you guys to think about like what that means and kind of like what your role is in that and moving forward and being in this together. So then I also want to talk about kind of like where IIDA has been, or where interior design and architecture has been. So according to IIDA, about 96% of the 87,000 practitioners in the interior design practice are women, and yet females at design firms only account for 25%. And then additionally, if we're moving over to the macro of architecture, out of roughly 115,000 architects, only about a third identify as women, and only 2% identify as Black. And then the cringeworthy number of 0.03% identify as Black women in architecture. And that number is even smaller, when you break it down to, states. And then also in the 2018 Equity by Design survey, we found that, females and minorities, or women and minorities, I don't want to say females, women and minorities and designers on average earn, lower than their male counterparts. And then more than 80% of respondents of the Equity by Design survey, they identified as heterosexual or straight, and 70% of the respondents reported that their firm leadership was mostly white. And so I just want to kind of throw those, stats around just to kind of frame where we are now. And then in those stats, there still isn't any conversation about intersectionality in our identities and how that informs the way that we move through space and the way that we practice. So I do want to talk about intersectionality as well, which is a term that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw over 30 years ago. And it's really talking about, what is the lens through which we can see like various forms of inequality that often kind of inform, the ways in which there is, discrimination and disadvantages for everyone. So when we're talking about Black people, or if we talk about Black, Indigenous people of color, there's also the intersections of race and class and orientation and ability and gender within that conversation that we want to make sure that we are including every single time. So we don't experience these things in isolation, and that's something that we're often missing. So these are kind of like the primer things that we want you guys to think about as we move through the discussion. And now I would like to introduce our wonderful panelists. So if you guys want to hop on, and then I will get you guys intro going. So first, we will start with Roderick. Hi, Roderick. Looking fabulous today, as ever. So Roderick Allen, he is a junior interior designer at IIDA Architects and Engineers. So Roderick is an interior designer with a focus on healthcare interiors at IIDA. He brings 4 years of experience to the table with previous project work, including healthcare interiors, sports facilities, workplace interiors, and forensics labs. Continually inspired by fashion, culture, and storytelling, Roderick aims to blend all three of these elements while designing. Identifying as a Black and gay individual with little attachments to pronouns, he finds the challenge and needs to design for Black, Indigenous people of color and the LGBTQIA+ persons within the built environment as essential in the future of interior design. So let's welcome Roderick. So next we have Nadia. Oh, hi. So next we have Nadia Colquiett, interior designer at ASD Sky. Nadia is an NCIDQ certified interior designer and has worked at ASD Sky doing corporate interior since graduating from Virginia Tech in 2016. From the moment she has entered the program in college and everywhere she has gone since, it has been impossible for her not to immediately be struck by the lack of racial diversity in the field. She looks forward to an ongoing conversation of systems that form this absence, how people of color are affected by this, and offer ways to make design more inclusive for designers and the communities that we serve. Hi, Nadia.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi. Okay, next we have Lisa Chumley, principal, experienced placemaker, and building architect at Gensler here in San Francisco. Lisa has worked across 4 continents with clients and project teams made up of many diverse backgrounds before joining Gensler in 2008. She delivered projects in the US, the UK, the Middle East, and Africa. Currently, her focus is on large-scale mixed-use commercial projects in the Bay Area, and Lisa has always been motivated by understanding what connects people in the built environment. She believes there is an invisible bond between who we are, how we occupy space, and what that space looks like. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Julia. Great to be here.
Okay, and last but not least, Albert Oliver, retired architect and formerly at Flad Architects, but he has a whole list of resumes, so let's get going. Prior to his official retirement in 2017, Albert worked at many prestigious firms, including Martha and Elliott Rotham, SOM, Wallace Floyd, Choi Kobus Associates, Anchin and Allen, SMT, and lastly, Flad Architects. His projects include hospitals, biotech and pharmaceutical companies, and medical and clinical science buildings and education institutions. Born in the mid-50s, Albert grew up in a time when the civil rights movement had taken hold, and his grandparents had been part of the Great Migration north from the South. Welcome, panelists. Okay, so again, we want to make sure that this is a safe space for all of our panelists to really be honest and authentic in the conversations that we're having. And we're hoping that you guys all have a tentative ear to the things that we are, talking about. So the first thing that I want to open with our panelists is to kind of ask, when were you first exposed to design, or how did you fall into design? And we could start with Albert.
There? Okay? No?
Yeah.
Good. So I think as a kid, I grew up in a 14-foot wide row house, which had aspirations of grandeur with columns and the columned porch and all that. But it wasn't until I think we took a family trip to Florida, and I insisted that we go visit the Fontainebleau Hotel, which was this amazing assembly of every motif you could think of. And that really got me very excited about design. And then after that were trips to New York, to the New York World's Fair, which was also quite, for me, an amazing experience because it wasn't just the place, but it was also what you saw and the places you experienced as you went in. So that kind of really got me going, besides the Legos, of course.
Okay, Lisa, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. I love that Albert mentioned Legos. That must be kind of every architect's beginning, probably. I think there are a few different ways I was exposed to architecture. No one in my family is an architect, but one funny way was actually the Brady Bunch. Mr. Brady was an architect, and I think I was fascinated by what he did. He was drawing all the time, and that really interested me. And then the next kind of inspiration was my mother took me to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and they have a piece by Frank Lloyd Wright house there, and I was just amazed by that room, and I thought, what is this, and who is this person? I want to do that. I think just the experience of that space was powerful. And then following that exposure, I then, as you know, she would take me to, when we would travel, we'd go see other important pieces of architecture. And then in high school, we had architectural drawing classes, which is pretty amazing. And so I think I really fell in love with it by learning how to draw and how to draw buildings. And they weren't exciting designs, I'll say that. I was 13 or 14 years old, but that was my exposure, just kind of loving this idea of creating and making space for people.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Do you want to go ahead, Roderick?
Yeah, so I first kind of knew what interior design was around middle school age. For some reason, my mom loved to go look at model homes over the weekend. So you used to go into the little model homes and you would talk to the people and you would just see all the finishes laid out. It's like, this is cool. This is nice. So I was interested. I was intrigued. I was hooked. And then I got to high school where we took an interior design class. But I think the most important part was when I actually knew it was for me is actually at an IIDA event as a student in college when I ran across a fellow Black designer. Her name is Witherspoon, who I actually got to talk to. And she reviewed my portfolio and was what really inspired me to kind of continue along the path.
Fantastic. I think I have some similarities there with the model as well. Nadia, would you want to weigh in on this?
Sure, yeah. So probably like everyone else, my mom is not like an architect or a designer. She's not particularly creative in the like traditional sense. But I remember like an art history class that I took in middle school, and I was just like so intrigued by how much we know about like our ancestors and people that have lived before us, like through spaces and through like architecture and design and like how people use things. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like spaces tell stories. That's dope. Love that. And then I think I did some like architectural drawing classes as well in high school. But I think when I got to college, and like especially when I just started like researching even before when I was like trying to pick my major, I just like fell in love with the process, with like that design thinking and problem solving that's like creative and technical all at once. It's just like I was like, I'm so good at this. Like I'm so good at something and it's amazing. So that's it for me.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask, how do your lived experiences kind of shape the way you see kind of the DEI or EDI effort, in the industry in relation to your experience? I think Roderick kind of mentioned that Kia Witherspoon was one of the people that kind of like sparked his interest or kind of like got him like moving. Is there anything that maybe kind of helped you in those from your experience?
Yeah, I think in that moment when you saw someone that looked like you doing what you did, because I remember when I actually first declared interior design as like my major, my parents were like, are you sure you don't want to do architecture? Are you sure you don't want to do something else? They were just like, what is interior design? How is that feasible? What is that actually? They were, akin to the HGTV people. So, you saw someone like that who is doing well and very passionate about what he's doing. So it was just a big inspiration overall. And I think, she was very poignant to grab all of the people of color in that room and be like, we need to take a picture because there are not many people like you or like us in the room. So I think from there on, it was very important to, be confident in who I was as a designer, not as also just inspirational, but also as a person of color.
Definitely. Anybody else have personal experience that they would like to share?
Yeah, I was thinking that when so once I knew that I wanted to be an architect, and I was definitely in high school, and for sure my mother absolutely encouraged me. And I think a big part of the conversation was also to make sure I knew that there weren't going to be a lot of people that looked like me, which wasn't really a surprise, but I think that was definitely came up in every conversation with every family member about what do you want to do? Oh, really? Okay. And so what was really important too is that my mother, I don't actually know how she did this, but managed to connect me with a Black woman who's an architect in Newark, New Jersey at the time. I grew up in New Jersey. And so I remember meeting her was kind of such a simple kind of acknowledgement of, oh, okay, there are people like me that do this. And it didn't really, it's not that I didn't think I could do it before, but it definitely helped to meet her. I think the next thing that was really powerful is that then I went to Cornell, and Cornell at the time had recently introduced a new role in the college. And that person's role was focusing on increasing minority recruitment in the college. And so I got to Cornell at a time when there was a real focus on changing the makeup of the classes. And so, and we still are. I mean, I've graduated 30 years ago. We were still a tight group of people who went to the school. And I think that was an amazing part of kind of understanding that we're often going to be the only people in the room in whatever we're talking about, but we can make a community of ourselves. And that, I think, is, and that's been a friendship that's lasted for 30 years. And now I think so we're all kind of piping up all over the place doing different things. I think that's been the realization of the community that I'm part of. That's a key part.
Nice, creating community. Okay, any other thoughts on this one?
Oh no, I agree with Lisa, because it really is. I think until I went to school and college, where I met other students who were Black, who were also interested in architecture. And you're right, those contacts that you make then kind of do stay with you the rest of the way, because you supported each other in school, in spite of kind of the pressures around you. Kind of all of my professors were I loved, but I really never had a professor of color who taught me. Mm-hmm. So it that made a big difference.
Right. Okay. And I think that's an important thing to note. I mean, even across, generations of how we're entering into the profession, what is sparking our interest, and where are the ways that we create community within the people that support us. So I want to get into the next question. So, these changes for, equity and inclusion have been really like a long time coming, and it's been, long overdue. And we've been here before. As you know, our seasoned professionals probably know, they've been through cycles of this. And there's renewed interest in this now. But people have been working at this for a long time. Now there's just kind of like another light shined on this. So we asked attendees upon registration what grade that they would give like the architecture and interior design industry. And I think the answers were like across the board. Like some people were giving us like B's and C's and D's and F's. And I have my own thoughts about where we are on this. But there seems to be a gap in perception of how well we're doing amongst our Black, Indigenous people of color and the allies. So I guess I want to start with Albert, but like what grade would you give the architecture and interior design industry, and how much progress have we or haven't we made in your opinion?
Okay, grading, well, maybe, I don't
Are we on
know,
a curve?
B minus, C plus. Can you hear me? Yeah. B minus or C plus, exactly. A curve, yes. And honestly, when I go to events and I look at faces, the proportions haven't really changed that much over time. So from when I got my degree in 78 through now, it's very similar. I mean, unless you happen to go to an event that's geared towards people of color. So not that everyone isn't, I think, trying, isn't good or nice or trying, but it's difficult sometimes, you know.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Nadia, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I can't really speak on progress because I've been working like professionally for 4 years, and I did some internships in college. But you know, I think we got a ways to go. It's just, what's the right way to say this? It's just like, you want to be optimistic. I think with all the conversations that are happening right now, I think they're really good conversations. I know a lot of people's offices are like getting together and talking, and that's really awesome. But you know, time will tell. And I think it's important to not let the conversations become too easy, because I think the reason why maybe, Albert, you haven't noticed very much change is because people aren't asking difficult questions. They're not asking, what are the barriers? What are the things that are stopping us from attracting, you know, people of color to this industry, and like really trying to work on those. And so I think, I don't know if I can give it like a grade necessarily, but I just know that there's like, it should be like more effort, please.
More effort, please. I like that. I definitely like that.
No grade, just keep working on it. We're never gonna get to like an A plus, you know. It's continuous process. So.
And what are your thoughts, Lisa?
I was kind of cheekily said, "Are we grading on a curve?" I was half serious.
Right.
And then I was really going to say, like, what's the grade range? I think I might say needs improvement. I think that's just where we are. I don't think anyone would disagree. I think that if I think of, you know, against our and what we've done and kind of what strategies we put forward, I think the honest answer is the strategies reflect an opinion that says, like, we can do better. There's more we can do. So I think that's the answer, right? I think I also sort of think it's, I mean, the question of what the grade is, I'd almost want to then say across what time scale, because I think, and I think, I forget if it was Julia or Nadia said, we've been here before. And I think in my lifetime, I can't think of a time when it was kind of such a focus. I think probably just before, like, I think I'm sort of the generation after when there was a focus for, I'd say, women and people of color. I would think those two things were kind of a focus. So if we're saying how well we're doing in the past year or so, then that would be a bad grade. If we're saying how well we're doing now that we're all paying attention more, I think it might just be like needs improvement. Yeah.
All right. Any other thoughts, Roderick, on this?
Yeah, I would agree along the lines of Nadia and Lisa. I think you take it back to kind of grade school where you didn't actually get a letter grade. You kind of just got, good, better, best, or needs improvement. So I agree. It's it's a great time to be having this conversation due to kind of the situation that we're in and everybody's exposed to the news right now. I guess the one caution behind it is kind of like not how we're doing now, but how are we going to continue to do better? Because this has happened before, kind of these murderings and killings that we've been, talking about for the past few months. It's happened before. And,
Right.
Back then I wasn't in the industry. So I were there statements then? Was there a pushback then, I guess is the question. I think around those times I was in college, so I was following along closely with, firms that I was interested in. And you really didn't see much of a public face from the industry about what was happening. So I guess it's more about like, how can we continue this upward trajectory based on the conversations being had now.
Mm-hmm. I feel it. I definitely feel it. And I think that the perception of kind of like where the gap is could be closed when there is, a higher resolution of the things that we're experiencing and where we can go based off of where we've been in the past. So I kind of want to get into, a little bit of the allyship conversation. So for my next question, I want to talk about, the black boxes that we were seeing on social media that was saying kind of like in solidarity with Black lives and statements that a lot of, design companies have made. And then also the rebuttals, from people online and specifically different social media accounts that were like the Black at whatever organization or whatever school, the hashtags, and these, platforms that are calling out employers for, lack of diversity and leadership and, talking about where they have fallen short or highlighting where statements may have been performative or in direct contrast with ongoing like daily injustices or aggressions in the workplace, or perhaps, the lack of true implementation of the change. So this is really for all the panelists, but how do you kind of like feel about how that is kind of like played out in the past couple of months?
I'll just say, it's good to elevate like Black or minority voices in any like organization. I think that's a really important step to make. I would just caution that it's just hard to tell if it's sincere and authentic, because especially like I feel like Roderick was talking about this as well, but like where we are with the pandemic and everything, people might just feel a lot of like peer pressure kind of to like follow suit with these things. And it's important that like the implementation of these avenues is like not just good, but comes from a place of like wanting to actually listen to these voices and like promote change. And I'll also just say that like the real work does not happen on Instagram. So like you can post and whatever, but like if you're not following up with like action items of things you can actually work on, like I'm kind of not here for that. So.
Yeah, I think that's really good point, Nadia, about kind of social media and online presence. A lot can be said online, but, it's kind of what are your actual day-to-day in-person actions. You can write out a progress plan for how you plan to, grow the presence of BIPOC or even LGBTQIA people in your organization. You can post that, but the actions that have gone forward to actually work to actually produce the result that you were hoping for, then kind of that written plan was just a nice show of, statement in the moment when it was kind of needed. So I think that's also important.
I think there are a couple things that I want to follow up on. One is that I sort of think we almost have to come back in a year and see actually where are we. So I think that there have been a lot of powerful statements made, since June 1st, right? Beginning of June rather, and it almost on a just practical level. Where are we 1 year from now, right? So who made statements? What have they done? So I think that is pretty straightforward. And I think people who are making statements should welcome that, right? I think there is no point in making the statements if you have no intention to follow up. So I think that is the new world we live in. I think, sure, maybe 10 years ago, it was easy to make a statement. No one's paying attention. Social media wasn't as big. And you could sort of make a statement and hide. And I think that doesn't happen anymore. I would also say, just to Nadia's point, that I would argue that the responsibility is both ways in terms of social media. And I think that I think if you to the person receiving the comment and the person saying something too, right, that it's also not okay to just say something and then you get to kind of have keyboard courage, right? I think there's sort of if you say something, like how can you be part of that too, right? Is there a way that you can collaborate or be part of the change too, So I think that yeah, I think that's a piece of social media. I mean, I think that we spoke, Julia, about all the Black ad accounts. I think that they're great. I think that's the power of social media, right? That everyone can have a voice. You don't have to get permission. You don't have to say to someone, I'd like to have a voice. I'd like to put up a billboard. You just open an account and get to talk. So I think that part's great. And yeah, and there are so many Black at different companies, Black at Gensler, Black at SOM, Black at Nike, right? There are all these accounts. I think I know that the Gensler one, we've written to the account to say, great, can we talk to you? How can we work on this? I think no one is happy to, I'm sure no one at any organization, I don't have to speak just for Gensler, is happy to see that or see that they have employees and colleagues that are having those kinds of experiences. So if that's the way to get for them to share it, okay, it's like great that there's a method to share. And I think the lesson for the organization is how can we learn from that and how can we partner? How can we solve this together then? Thank you for finding a way to tell us. And now what can we do? I think that, so I would say that there might be it would be helpful if there could be a dialogue about it.
Great. So are you seeing, I guess this is for all of the panelists, are you seeing, ways that your employers or even other companies really, including you in these conversations and being very specific about how they want to move forward in terms of pay equity analysis or restructuring hiring practices or promotional practices or who gets on projects or what that looks like? Are you starting those conversations?
Yes. Can I just say yes to all of that? It's definitely against it for sure. At the region level, at the firm-wide level, yes, totally.
Does anyone else see kind of opportunities for that? Oh.
Yeah, I'd say also HCA is doing a lot of work on, one, racial equity, but then also talking about pay equity and kind of starting a task force or kind of a committee to really look at how business as like a firm-wide office level are, how we can be more equitable in the people that we're hiring, how we're paying people. So yeah, we are also in that process of doing things of that sort.
ASB has our like IDEA group where we've just like sort of selected certain topics that we want to talk about and sent like videos and articles and that sort of thing. And then we all get together in a group like among all of our offices, not just the San Francisco one, like our Atlanta office and that sort of thing, to get a dialogue going and for us to all just try to understand each other a little bit more. So I think that's been really helpful.
I guess I want to say the other thing that I think Kenthar's doing too is that we're all designers here. I know we're architects, interior designers, but we're all designers, here. That's part of what we're all called to do. And so one of the things that we're also talking about is how will the work we do have to change too, right? So yes, about learning about each other, and yes to partnerships, and yes to equity conversations, but also like the work. How is our work doing something different to you? How are we working with different people? How are we providing for different communities? So how are we amplifying Black voices? Like it's getting back to the work too.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is a great question. I can kind of like hop onto, that initial statement. I think a lot of us know that like architecture and interior design, traditionally has been, a design service for, people who have more than enough assets and like resources. And, many people of color see interior design, and architecture as something that happens to them, and it's not with them or like for them or with their input. And I think that, really grappling with that, idea is in specific to the Bay Area, where there's huge sensitivities around gentrification and displacement. Like, how do we begin to change that, narrative to move, towards more a holistic and, humanitarian or, inclusive approach to design, business, and, professional practice?
I don't know. I'm not sure what kind of outreach. Oh, sorry, Nadia. But
no, Albert, go ahead, please.
Yeah, but there is an issue of outreach, and I think that with trade publications and everything's quite insular right now. So trying to reach out to other communities about what we do and who we are and why what we do can be good for you to help. That's not quite yet there. So I think it's not just the professions, design professions, but I think it's also everyone else who touches us, our clients as well. I think that, I've kind of gone to clients, and I know sometimes there's been a little surprise at being me as the lead person. But it's kind of that sort of education. And I think I'm not exactly sure now that I'm out of the profession how that happens. I'm hoping my firm, the places I worked for are doing something, but I honestly don't know right now.
Oh, Albert, you said like just what I was going to say, basically, just about outreach. So recently, like my partner has been like, he's been involved in some like community projects like parklets and like building homes and stuff for folks. And I'm like, why don't they come to us? Because like community organizers and stuff, these grassroots organizations, like they don't know about us, or they don't think that we can help them. And that's a problem, like that they don't see us as a part of their community. So I think first things first is like getting out into the community, like talking to people, whether it's volunteering and getting like some paid time off, that we can like go and engage with our communities so that we can actually serve them by learning from them. Because I think, especially as designers, like we have this expertise and it's beautiful and wonderful, but we go into things thinking that we need to like solve people's problems for them and not like listen to what they have to offer and what they can teach us. So I think that is like a super huge thing that we can start doing. Yeah, and I think in general too, like design, I feel like we're all sort of taught as designers, like, okay, like this is design, so you just like remove yourself from this so you don't get like, like you don't feel like you're personally attacked when there's like a critique or something like that, which is understandable. But I think in that removal, we start to like not necessarily use our experiences and our like personal gifts to inform our design. So I think this is sort of like a restructuring of like how we look at design and like ourselves, because there's like very clearly like that link, that important connection between the designer and what they produce. And so I think that's a really important place to look as well.
Definitely. I really like what you pointed out there about designers, almost being, stewards of the community in that way, in kind of raising your hand or a flag so people know where to find you. Any other thoughts?
I would just agree along the same lines, and I was actually thinking about this the other day, and I couldn't figure out the exact way to phrase it, so I kind of thought of it in a law firm mentality, where, usually some law firms will require their associates or whoever to do pro bono hours. It would be nice if, there was some sort of outright, just, your firm encourages you to do so many pro bono hours within a year. To outreach to because there's always someone who needs some sort of design assistance, just so even if it's just like helping someone just like refresh their tiny office in the back of a soup kitchen or something like that. I think just knowing that there's also the encouragement behind you to go out and engage with the community would also kind of help bring the focus more towards the forefront as well.
I really like Nadia's comment about, hadn't thought about it that way, but it's really powerful, your commentary about in school that we're taught to sort of remove ourselves, like make it sort of less personal. If we think about what our examples of architecture that we're taught are typically not from communities of color anywhere in the world, right? And so we're somehow taught that there's some kind of universal ideas about space, right? That there's this evenness, right? That we all kind of understand it the same way. And that's simply not true. And I think we all kind of unlearn that somewhere in school. Like, so that our classes are teaching us to find these universal ideas about space and proportion and color theories. And they're taught to us in this kind of even sort of peanut butter spread everywhere. This means the same to everyone. And I think that certainly for me, I can think of classes I took in college where we took classes about Sri Lankan architecture and African architecture and realizing, wow, like just having my mind blown around those things I was just told they're kind of universal, how they're really not. Like so I think that's that all of that to say that I think the more I get in my career, it's more about not looking for the universal anymore, right? That really to be specific and personal and kind of the lived experience, and not to be a designer that's kind of, how can I make it the same everywhere? Yeah.
Interesting. And I like how you guys are, beginning to talk about education and kind of where is the basis of our ideals and philosophy about design. And I think it is interesting that we, as designers are, supposed to design for specific user groups, for people, and elevating the human experience. And that is kind of like in contrast with us kind of removing ourselves from that. So I think that's an interesting truth. But moving on to, education, or I guess education and mentorship, I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit. So for, a lot of people, there isn't, a clear cut path to leadership in the design industry. And, a lot of the times it takes people of color longer to rise to, leadership positions compared to their counterparts. And I think we've seen in recent years that there's been, robust, programs that could, help in this effort. But I wanted to ask, has mentorship or the lack of mentorship played a role in how you approach professional practice? Has it helped or hindered in your career growth?
Hugely.
I would say that.
Go ahead, Roderick. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
No. Up to you.
Okay. I would say that I've actually found that when I first started, I didn't really have a mentor, and kind of the first year or two after, I really got in my groove and found people who I consider a mentor, and that really did help my career growth, because kind of one of my mentors really told me that, if you can't speak for yourself, then no one else will. So if you can't outright say, I don't feel like I'm getting paid enough, or I have a great idea that, should be listened to, then no one else really will do that for you. So I think that was one of the biggest things I took away, is that kind of I do have a voice in the conversation, no matter how junior or how senior or wherever I land in the structure, kind of everyone's voice is relevant. So that was a big thing that I took away. And I feel pretty happy with where I'm at in my career right now.
Thank you.
I was going to say, I think it doesn't, I would have to say my career doesn't exist without mentors. I think that there are some that I, at the time, maybe didn't realize that they were mentors, but there's so many things I learned from them. And also, I could say that some of my mentors were my colleagues, people in my cohort, right? That it's not just that I've always learned from people that are senior, that I'm looking at understanding how to navigate a situation, but just watching my friends and colleagues, how they're proceeding. So I think it's kind of an expanded view of mentorship. But for sure, I think, and those allies, I think in my career, if I think of all of my jobs, I don't think I've ever had a boss that was Black, actually, when I think about it. So all to say that it's absolutely about allyship, right? That there were white men and white women, and that they were the people that were helping me and teaching me and helping me move forward and letting me know, helping me navigate. So I think, but I think that's true always, right? If I think of any group that has fought for rights, haven't gained those rights talking to themselves, right? So I think allyship that's just the key to women, people of color, LGBTQ, like TIA. That's just how we move forward. We talk to each other, and that's great, and that's maybe powerful, and like that helps us feel strong. But then if we don't open our arms and kind of bring in the larger group, how else we move forward, right? How we can't get in the room that we're not in. So that's huge. So I guess whether you call that mentorship or allyship, it's all the same story that we needed. So for sure, I think I would be amazed if someone said that they got somewhere without that. That would be a powerful misunderstanding. I think if anyone thought, oh, I don't have any mentors.
Any other thoughts about mentorship?
Sure. I just wanted to say that, yeah, I mean, I've had in the same vein as what Lisa just said, everyone can be a mentor. So you just, you want to appreciate the relationships that you have with people and understand like what you can learn from them and just keep an open mind in that. But I will say that I think it would be, like, looking back at my career now, it would have been beneficial for me to have a mentor that was maybe a person of color, just because especially within firms, because cultures and values and those sort of things just like vary so much. I think just helping to navigate that specific situation would have been, helpful. But I appreciate the people that I've been around. But I also wanted to say that in stating that everyone can be a mentor, it's so important to try to like understand where other people are coming from in like a very active way. And I think you can do that without like asking your coworkers and like poking them and asking them a bunch of weird questions. But I think just researching, reading articles, whatever about like how it feels to be Black or gay in a workplace, like just coming with some background information to see like perhaps the struggles that this person may be facing, just like as soon as they step their foot in the door, like there's already all this pressure on them, So I think everyone knowing that is going to be beneficial to everyone.
Yes, and I think as a coda, if somehow mentoring was always on my evaluations as I kind of went through work. Have you mentored? Do you want to mentor? Who do you want to mentor? But I think to have firms somehow build that into even fee structure, because when I came up, I went to meetings with people. I talked to clients. I did all these things as a junior person, and because I could be in the room to do this. But I noticed later on that as fee structures changed, you couldn't just bring someone out with you to a meeting so they could learn by being there, because, oh no, they're not adding value to the meeting, when they really are adding value in the end. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at in the kind of how projects get structured.
Great. No, that is a great point in support in how, others could gain exposure and learning and bringing them into conversations, into meetings with clients, and exposing them to things that they can learn at a younger age in their career versus waiting until they're the project manager to be doing these things, and giving them that level of exposure. So I want to move on. It's kind of it's related to what we were just talking about, but I want to talk about, exposure in universities. And I know that, Lisa, you have been a professor at Howard University, which is an HBCU, which for those of you who don't know, it's historically Black college and universities. So do you want to talk about, the entry point there, or nurturing people in the university setting?
Yeah, sure. I was thinking just now as a follow-up to the question before, they kind of go nicely together, is that because I kind of answered it from when I was only looking for mentors, and now realizing that actually, as much as I like to pretend I'm not the age that I am, or that I've worked as long as I have, that actually I realized that I do have a real responsibility to be a mentor to other people too, right? So I take that really seriously, and I think that's kind of not just for people of color. I think my role is to be a mentor to lots of different people. I just realize that that's at some moment in your career, you realize that you're on both sides of that table now. That there are people that are still my mentors and vice versa. And then yeah, in teaching, I think well, it's similar. And your questions, I guess, specifically about what's different about being at an HBCU or teaching there, or the difference there.
Mm-hmm.
I think the difference there, I was having a conversation about this with someone today about because I was born in Guyana, and we're talking about being from the Caribbean, and what does it mean to be from a country where you are used to seeing people that look like you in charge. And so, the doctor, the lawyer, the prime minister, everyone around you, the people that run the place look like you. And so that's kind of at the time the conversation was about, how does my lived experience affect my filter? And that was a piece. And so I say that because I think an HBCU is a similar thing. Actually, the conversation we talked about Kamala Harris, I think, is where we're going with it. But that what's different being at a HBCU is that, there's a whole different level of, it's kind of just self-awareness and confidence that you get by being surrounded by people who look like you. You're learning a different history, you're learning different information, because it's literally a whole world of knowledge that is a piece of another university. It's kind of entirely in a world. So I think I think also when I think of the projects that we did there is more of a focus of kind of engaging with the community and when you're working on projects. So I think that the projects tended to be not kind of, if I think of ones I had at college where it's like an artist pavilion in the woods, but at Howard it might have been, what are you going to do with this block that's now abandoned? Like the projects were way more about the place and connected to a community. So I think there's a whole different idea when people of color are thinking about how we design versus kind of not. So I think that's a big difference with being there.
Great, thanks. I think that's a great, summation of talking about kind of the differences between maybe attending a historically Black college university and then attending a PWI, a predominantly white institution, or an Ivy League school, where the education and what you are learning could be slightly different, and then how that all may be different when you enter professional practice. So thank you for that, Lisa. And you talked about, intersectionalities of identities. And, that's something that I really like to talk about because, Black people are not a monolith. And I hear from a lot of people that attend HBCUs that they didn't realize that there's so many people in the diaspora. And I think that's something really beautiful. So, when we're talking about, the Black experience, we also need to integrate, all the ways that, we have differences, or all the pieces that make us, us. So, I really want to talk about, the interior design industry and how it really has, a larger community of LGBTQIA plus, persons, especially in the Bay Area. And I think that there tends to be kind of like an erasure of origins of, like where pride came from. It's all fun right now in the Bay Area. So I wanted to kind of talk about, why it's important for us to understand, you know, the history of, you know, the Pride movement and, you know, how that intersects with why, you know, all Black lives matter within the design space and beyond. Roderick or Albert, maybe you can respond to this one.
I think, you know, it's been very interesting in San Francisco to watch the myth of Stonewall kind of happen, and so much so that people do forget kind of how things actually started in New York. Yeah. And, sorry. Yeah. So it's become so corporate. And I think the fact that there were people of color, minorities, Black people, drag queens and all of this, who really were kind of the ones who were oppressed first, I think mostly, although they weren't talked about. And because what you read and saw were predominantly Caucasian people who were, you know, protesting and doing things, but you never got to hear the other side of the story. So I think that does need to kind of come back into the forefront and help. For me, going through San Francisco from the 70s, when there was this huge gay migration to San Francisco, at that point in time, it was liberating to some degree, but also you realize that so many people who came brought the baggages with them. If they were racist or if they just weren't accepting of other kinds of people, that came with them. So you're in this community that is supposedly celebrating diversity and all of this, and in the end, it's like trying to have to educate people all the time. So it's very, very interesting, I think, kind of living through those times. But Roderick, you're certainly a different generation, and I don't know for you how different it is.
Yeah, I think, like Albert said, it's important to note that, you know, here in the Bay Area, Pride is such a big celebration, but it actually started off as, you know, more of a riot. And that's one thing to note, is that, you know, a lot of people of color were on the front lines doing that work, beyond drag queens, but then it moves on to, you know, like trans individuals who, you know, even today I think are somewhat left out in our design mentality. And I think the easiest way to think about that is when we're programming a building and there's a need for toilet rooms. You know, we do talk about the all gender restroom, but, you know, a lot of that conversation is more so just based on, oh, it's good to have one for certain needs, but I don't, you know, it's kind of hard because, you know, how do I put this? There's nowadays, like Albert mentioned, so many different kind of expressions of the spectrum of what would be the gay and queer community, that there's a little bit more thought that needs to go beyond designing for a bathroom for a person, and thinking about how you can actually design an actual out in the open space that is welcoming and comforting to a person who may identify as non-binary or gender queer or gender non-conforming. And I think really it's a conversation that needs to start being had, because we're the ones informing space right now, really, and how I think it's about using our ability to, one, acknowledge that these people are here and present. And I think even in my generation and what would be the generation after me, you're seeing a lot more people that kind of identify within that queer spectrum. So I think designing for that population out in the open is just as important. And I think it starts with, you know, having a warm and welcoming environment. Luckily, I can say that I've worked at two amazing firms who, the first day I decided to walk in my heels up to the sky, they were just like, yes, we support you. We love it. It doesn't change any way we see you as a professional. So that has been great. I think that's been lovely. because I think, you know, before I moved out here, it was a little nerve wracking. I was like, okay, maybe I'll just wear my Oxfords instead. But it isn't really who I am. So I think it's been nice to know that I at least can say where I've been, there has been at least an acceptance of, you know, the spectrum beyond the LGBT.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing, Roderick. I think that was a beautiful explanation. And I think the way that we kind of like view, you know, inclusivity, intersectionality, it really needs to be, you know, the conversation. That's like the floor. Like when we think about, you know, accessibility, when we think about inclusion, we don't need to think about it as like an afterthought or an add-on. It really needs to be that integrated, you know, conversation to be authentic and move forward. And so I think that is time for our panel questions. Thank you, panelists. We're going to move on to the Q&A portion. So make sure if you have questions, make sure to put them in the question chat. And then hopefully we can get to your questions. I want to start with one question here that talks about, you know, client relationships. And the question asks, have any of the panelists seen a shift in allyship in client relationships? And if so, how have those conversations unfolded? Like, how are you bringing that up with the client? And have those conversations started to impact the way the firm and the client starts to approach projects? Have you seen that conversation start to happen, or maybe you have thoughts about how you hope that could happen?
Can you read it one more time? It's about allyship with clients. Sorry, just say it
Yeah.
one more time.
Mm-hmm. So have any of you seen a shift in allyship in your client relationships? Like, are you having, you know, conversations with the clients about, you know, more inclusive, you know, design processes or practices in that way?
We are starting to, and actually there was a conversation that I had the other day. So one of the kind of communities, internals against there, is about our client relationships. And I was speaking to my colleague who runs that in the region. We're talking about how is this conversation about diversity, inclusion, equity filtering into her kind of field, her frame. I have a role along with my colleague as the regional director around diversity and inclusion. So it's my role to kind of talk to everyone about this. And so in conversation with her, she brought up a point that a client was talking about when we take the photographs of the work, who do we have in the photos? And, you know, on one level, that was the kind of, it's either on the project team or who's available to go. And the kind of specific request around how do we make that more diverse? And so I think that we've definitely been talking about, you know, the collateral that when we do renderings and things, why is that not more reflective of just a diverse community? So I think that we're starting those conversations. I think they haven't quite happened, but in all of the kind of the strategies that we're looking at as a firm, one of them is absolutely around our clients and our partnerships, and that this isn't going to work again if we talk about the work that we have to do or whatever promises we might make. It can't work if we're just doing them, right? We have to bring our partners, you know, our colleagues at other firms. We all have to kind of work together.
Any other thoughts on that? I mean, there is another, you know, question in the chat that's like kind of like similar and kind of expanding on this question, where it's talking about how the majority of interior design and architecture firms are classified as small businesses, but then there is a large chunk of people that work for like the large corporate companies. And then they're kind of asking about, you know, if we can explain, like through our contracts, that a certain percentage of our fees are being inflated, and in that way helping support, you know, salary equity or for women or minorities, or in support of pro bono services. And I guess the question is asking, you know, how do we ensure that firms can like dedicate a certain percentage to, you know, EDI practice? And I think I'm a little long-winded all the time when I'm framing, but a lot of the time we see EDI work or JEDI work, happening within companies, but there isn't really like a budget behind it or a way that it's integrated into our contract. So I guess that's more of the question, is kind of expanding on that question with, client relationship. How are we integrating that? Or maybe we're not there yet. Maybe we don't know yet.
It has to be part of the ask because it has to be sustaining, right? If it doesn't become part of, to be frank, like the budgets of all of our organizations and it doesn't exist, right? It's not enough to, oh, we found the money this year to do a thing, right? It needs to be. So I think that's the ask for all of us in our roles, and whether we're people of color or allies, or people that are interested, or people that care about this. I think that that's an obligation, I would say, to our organizations to say, this thing has to be sustaining. It isn't enough to, I don't know, pay for us to go to conferences here. So I think that's the ask. And I guess everyone who cares about this, is the question we should be asking our colleagues and the leaders of our firms. Like, please show us how this is in our budget going forward, right? So I think the question is about how is it implemented, and I think that's every organization have their own business systems and how they're running them. So I don't think the details are the key now, but I think it's that all of us maybe have the obligation to ask or make sure that these efforts are being made permanent and not kind of, oh, we did the budget for this year. The question is, no, this should be a budget for the next forever. In the same way you have a budget for entertaining, or a budget for training, and a budget for IIDA membership, and a budget for AIA membership, there should be a budget always for whatever we think the JEDI efforts are.
Yeah, and especially as clients are making these efforts and putting money into kind of help assisting their employees, then I think designers and architects have to do the same thing too. But I think it means that there has to be a conversation with our clients that say, okay, you're doing this, we're doing it, but we're not going to do it and not charge you for it, because we don't think that's fair to our employees, and our employees reflect who we are, as well as in your company, your employees reflect who you are. So often I could see this being kind of negotiated out, because it's like, well, that's your problem with your overhead, it's not ours, but it's everyone's problem.
Yeah, I agree. I would think that, it's just something we're gonna have to work on. And I think as an industry, I think it will be really powerful if we all start to push this as something that we think is important, because I know a lot of the time when people pick, their designers, because we're all submitting for these projects now, it's like, okay, the budget comes down, it comes down to budget sometimes when a client chooses their designer. So I think if this is built into the cost of having your designer, regardless of who you pick, then I think that is going to be a really powerful statement that we are making as an industry, that this isn't something that you can just choose to not, implement. This is going to happen, regardless of who you choose, because we all think this is an important thing that we can find solutions to that needs to be funded. So.
Great. All beautiful points. We are almost at our time, and I would really like to thank our panelists for being so open and honest and authentic, kind of in their voice. And I want to acknowledge that it takes kind of emotional effort to kind of speak to this multiple times over and over again. I'm sure we've had conversations with our employers, with our friend groups, our professional networks. So I really want to, thank our panelists for being here and being present today. And I guess the last quick question I wanted to ask before we kind of get into our closing statements is, how do you practice self-care? And we can start with Roderick.
For me, I I think it's really one, I learned to kind of let the stressors of the day go. So, we're stuck at home. I will, really just take time to end my day, shut everything down, and just really like stretch and let everything go. And I think that's a good part. And then skincare also helps personally. I mean, if you have good skin, at least nobody knows you're tired. We're obviously all overworked, so yes. But I think just like taking time to realize in these moments that us as Black people, we're strong, we're resilient. If it's just scrolling through a couple of various articles that mention strong Black individuals. Personally, I have a very strong love for strong Black women, so just reading about them and just really, it encourages me, makes me feel better. Yeah, I think that's an easy way to do it for me.
Any thoughts, Lisa?
Yeah, I think a few things. One, I think actually the COVID and everyone being at home, I think is part of what's changed this conversation, why this has become, everyone has time to care right now, right? I think that's a piece that we talked about before. So I think likewise for me, I think I have a whole bunch of kind of COVID skills. I think it's forced me to slow down and kind of think about things differently. So for example, I have always loved cooking, but I, make one meal a day, or like I cook over the weekend. So I think cooking for myself is incredibly like joy making, to stop. And to me, it's almost like a design project. I think it's sort of the ingredients, and it's not about what it looks like, but I think that's a kind of bit of a design in there. So cooking for myself just more intentionally is a piece. I started walking, and that has been like an incredible bit of self-care. Through the walking, I'm sort of able to kind of think through things. If something is really bothering me, I can kind of focus on it on the walk, and it feels resolved after about an hour. So I think that's been a great discovery, just the power of movement, right? Just getting up and moving your body. And part of it, like Roderick was saying, it's that for me that started off as a way to end the workday, because I think maybe we all had that moment of when it started kind of work in life. It was like this big messy thing. It was just like moving back, because you wake up and like your commute was 3 minutes. So I think that going for a walk and even cooking became in ways to enforce breaks in the day of kind of, it's time to change the clothes and go for a walk. It's time to cook a meal. So I think those have become that. And in the absence of that, then I could just make a Negroni. That's another way that I practice self-care, a nice cocktail.
Love it. Me too. Any thoughts, Albert?
Sure. I think, like Lisa, going on walks, but also I think taking time to, I'm at an age now where I can reflect on my parents, my grandparents, their lives, how they got to where they were, how that affected me. That I found that to be quite, it helps a lot, because you always think that you're in this on your own, you're by yourself, and you forget what your ancestors kind of did or went through to get you there. And then also just meditation through, I do acupuncture. So the acupuncture, which leads into meditation, has been like really, really helpful.
Any thoughts, Nadia? Closing our last question.
Oh boy. Yeah, I think I have a lot of similarities to what everyone else has said. Just like releasing tension with meditation, journaling, getting out and moving, like running, and I started roller skating. So that's really fun and painful. And then, yeah, just like taking care of my plants and like hugging my cat and my boyfriend, because they're like the only people I can hug right now. And
right, so good.
Yeah, and then just being like soft with myself, I think, because I think I try to hold it together a lot. And just like during, when we were like in the office and things were more normal, I was just like, okay, I'll keep all this stuff in, and it'll just be fine, and it's fine. And it wasn't fine. So I think just being able to like cry when I need to has been like very helpful. So, because it's hard to be strong all the time.
Thank you. No, thank you. I think that is a really good point. I think there's a lot going on, and it's important to kind of like be in touch with ourselves and you know, not subscribing to the things that we think that we should be doing, but really just, you know, hone in on what those things are to take care of ourselves. So with that, I really do want to thank our panelists for, you know, being, you know, present in this conversation and providing some gems here. So, you know, lastly, for final thoughts, we just want to make sure that this conversation has resonated with a lot of people and really, you know, sparked, you know, their interest in moving towards action, and not just stopping at, you know, listening and, you know, the beginnings of allyship, but really, you know, finding ways that you could be, you know, helpful to the conversation. So there's a number of things that you can do, and which probably things that you hopefully have been doing in the past couple of months, or you can start now. But really, you know, it's about listening to, you know, Black designers, Black Indigenous people of color who are designers, listening to them without judgment, you know, which is what you're doing right now. And, you know, amplifying those Black voices, whether it's inside of the workplace and outside of the workplace, providing those people with opportunities to lead on projects, or having their, you know, viewpoints and voices in the meeting hold equal weight with other people. And really being an ally. You know, we talked about the, you know, the gap in the perception of like what being an ally is, but I would really like to point out that like you don't really start out as like, oh, I'm an ally now, so I'm like really good at it. And I think that people can't be afraid to like start somewhere and then grow in their knowledge about allyship. So we're not expecting people to be perfect, but we expect people to be present and to care, right? And then we want to, you know, talk about committing to this. We want to see, you know, you guys, you know, in this 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now. And we really want to make sure that you're doing your homework, and we want you to be with us. And then also partner, you know, with Black owned, you know, businesses or practices. That could be a way that you're starting to do that. We talked a lot about outreach and different, you know, pinch points of the pipeline. So hiring, you know, Black designers or working in partnership. And then also expanding your networks. I mean, I think we talk about interior design, and there's a large demographic of a specific group of people. And I think that even if you're trying to do that work, if your network is, you know, more homogeneous, it's not particularly helpful. So maybe kind of like step out and try to, you know, diversify your general, you know, networking group. And then also just for work, you know, reevaluating your hiring processes, reevaluating, you know, your promotion processes. Thinking about if you are providing opportunities or mentoring someone, you know, the makeup of your executive teams, and things of that nature. So I know I'm a little bit long-winded to close this out, but we really want you to be here for the movement, you know, and not the moment. And that's something that we've been hearing a lot, but it really rings true. And this conversation is really, really important, and it can't stop here either. We need to have continued conversations. And so we do have a list of resources of books and videos and articles and organizations to follow. And I think we have a couple of them here that we are showing on our slide here, but then we are also going to share, I think, on the website, the more, you know, robust list of ways that you can get engaged. But I do particularly want to point out some design-specific handles that you can jump into right now. So Beyond the Built on Instagram, Design as Protest, Just City Lab, Designing Justice, Designing Spaces, Black Space Org, Black Folks in Design, Department of Places, Creative Reaction Lab, Noma National, and Determined by Design, which is Kia Weatherspoon's handle. But that, you know, is not an exhaustive list. As well as shouting out, you know, the collaborators of Space Industries, who has a huge comprehensive list of resources available. And so with that, I want to turn it back to Yoko, the president of Northern California IIDA.
Hi, Julia, and all of our amazing panelists. Thank you so much for this incredible conversation. I'd like to quickly give a shout out to our Equity Initiative Committee. It was truly a team effort, and we're very grateful for all of their time and dedication to make this happen. And as we mentioned earlier on the top, this is not, this is one of the part that we are starting, but there's sort of a multifaceted effort that is going behind the scene in terms of community outreach and mentorship programs. It's more to come. And then I just wanted to also close with a little teaser for upcoming Equity Initiative events. We are starting an exciting partnership with Southern California Chapter for the equity programs. And next event will be hosted by them on September 1. And it is the Inclusivity Roundtable, and it's going to be emceed by Cheryl Durst. So please mark your calendar. And also we're starting to plan our second Dignity, Equity, and Justice by Design in October. So please stay tuned. And I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today for this great conversation. And thank you, everyone, panelists, Julia, great, thank you. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.